MotorStorm Apocalypse is the third and final mainline entry in the MotorStorm franchise. Like the previous games, it's a fast and frantic arcade racer that's big on action. Unlike the previous games, this entry introduces, as the name suggests, real-time destruction on a grand scale. It's also the only game in the series set in an urban environment, and that allows you to customize the performance of your vehicles. Actually, Evolution Studios tried a ton of new ideas with this one that pushed the series forward in some interesting ways. They made some questionable choices too, like adding in actual gambling and locking offline content behind online progression. It also has it also has the worst campaign I've ever suffered through. Additionally, Apocalypse was the victim of probably the most ill-timed launches of all time, which basically guaranteed it was dead on arrival. I reckon the racing is some of the best on the PS3, and it holds up extremely well. It's just a shame that for everything that it got right, there's an equal number of things that it got wrong, especially when playing it today. So we're going to unpack all of that in this video. We'll look at some of the other games in the series too, and of course I'll cover your options for playing it today.
Let's do this!
The first MotorStorm was essentially a launch title for the PS3. It was pretty light on content, but at the time the visuals were considered cutting edge, and there wasn't really anything else like it. It was visceral, raw, and had an energy that very much screamed next gen. The sequel, Pacific Rift, arrived 2 years later and improved on the formula with a raft of new features, such as 4-player local split screen, new vehicles, and new mechanics that made the racing more strategic. Although the series had enjoyed both critical and commercial success with the earlier titles, developer Evolution Studios decided to make some big changes with the third entry. Game director Matt Southern said that one of the reasons they took the game in such a radical new direction was because of the declining interest in the racing genre. The most substantial innovation is the real-time destruction that can alter the track's layout, and this required that a large portion of the codebase be overhauled. The number of dynamic objects was significantly increased over the previous game, as well as adding in NPCs that you can interact with. Another big addition is the story mode, something that the earlier games lacked completely, and a common complaint with the series up until that point. Track variety is another clear distinction. The other games were criticised for being repetitive, and the developers cited this as a key area of improvement. In the festival mode, you rarely race the same track twice, with over 30 distinct courses. Customization continued to be a focus. The earlier games let you modify things like body kits, paint jobs, and decals, but Apocalypse is the only game that lets you customize performance. There's a massive asterisk next to this one though, so we're going to come back to it. Apocalypse made other improvements too, such as dynamic lighting, better anti-aliasing, and a native 1080p display resolution, which is something of a rarity for the platform. Online received a slew of new features as well, such as a new progression system. So while the core experience is familiar, the package that surrounds it has been almost completely changed. It came out in early 2011 to mostly positive reviews, although it didn't score as high as either of the previous games. What ruined the launch though, and what undoubtedly led to much lower sales, was something that no one could have anticipated. On the 11th of March 2011, the same day the game was due to launch in Japan, a 9.0 megathrust earthquake occurred off the northeastern coast of Japan's main island. This triggered a tsunami that struck the coast with waves reaching up to 40 meters high. It caused hundreds of billions of dollars worth of damage and tragically was responsible for the deaths of almost 20,000 people. As a result, the game's launch was postponed, with the Japanese release being completely abandoned. Believe it or not, that wasn't the only natural disaster to affect the game's launch. Earlier in February, Christchurch, New Zealand was hit with a 6.3 magnitude earthquake, and out of respect for both disasters, the game's launch was delayed until May. Because of this, many European game stores chose to cancel pre-orders, and this undoubtedly had a major impact on sales. The game would eventually release, but would you believe it was further affected by the infamous PSN outage that started on April 20th and lasted until May the 14th? The game ended up launching on May 3rd in North America, which meant that players during this time couldn't access the online features. Man, it just couldn't catch a break. Sony never revealed any sales numbers for the game, although given that the series sold about 6 million copies, with 3 million of those coming from the first game and about 1 million for the sequel, it's unlikely that Apocalypse cracked 1 million. according to some sources, it may have sold as few as 200,000 copies, although I couldn't verify this number. Apocalypse was the last main entry in the series. There would be one more game, MotorStorm RC, which was a smaller budget digital-only release for both the PS3 and Vita. And while it did review well enough, it clearly wasn't enough to keep the series alive. From a gameplay perspective, the core racing has remained unchanged. Various classes of vehicles race through unorthodox tracks with different routes, where ramming and sideswiping is encouraged. Each class has their own advantages and disadvantages, as well as unique handling traits. For example, the heavy vehicles are slow to accelerate and turn like an 87 Mitsubishi Magna, but they're essentially tanks and can drive through the smaller vehicles. Conversely, the bikes are fast and nimble, able to take advantage of routes that the larger vehicles can't, which is sometimes safer. Every vehicle has access to a boost, which provides a momentary injection of speed. You can also use boost to sideswipe rivals. If you overheat from boosting too much, you'll explode, so boost management is a critical part of race strategy. The biggest change with this game are the highly destructible environments. This isn't like Split Second where you have control over these events. They do play it in a similar way though, changing the track layout and creating obstacles to avoid. Track design is generally awesome, allowing for multiple ways to approach each race, especially when you change vehicles, and the destruction adds an interesting layer of complexity to navigate. Races are mostly exhilarating, although there are a few things that can be frustrating. This is mostly because they don't always feel fair. You can easily get wiped out by shit there was no way to avoid or that you didn't see coming. Getting rammed from behind in anything but the trucks will spin you around, and this happens frequently. If you're on a bike, getting rammed will generally result in instant death, catapulting you like a ragdoll, which, to be fair, never failed to make me smile. Also, sometimes there's so much shit going on, other cars, things blowing up, or the track changing before your eyes, that it can be near impossible to see where the track is, or know what the fuck is going on. It's hard to be frustrated though when the action is this fast and it looks this spectacular. Playing through the festival mode, more than once I laughed out loud at the pure insanity that was on the screen. So, the game is split into two distinct modes. The Festival, which is the story mode, and the Recreation mode, which is the single race events and the multiplayer. Festival mode has a story, if you want to call it that. This explains who the racers are and why they're racing in a ruined city. If it wasn't obvious, it's bad. Like, really bad. There's almost no story to speak of, and the dialogue is appalling. The characters are all trite cliches, and it comes across as something that a horny teenager came up with. It feels very mid-2000s in the worst kind of way. The cutscene animations are truly awful and extremely cheap looking. They look like placeholder storyboards, and there's so many of them. The racing genre is no stranger to low-effort narratives, but you get the feeling that this wasn't the original vision and perhaps cuts were made.
So, what's up with your eye?
It's glass. Hey, not many guys look me in the eye.
Get lost, Candy.
This, believe it or not, isn't the biggest problem with the festival mode. The main issue is that you can't pick your vehicle. You can't even pick the class. It has 3 difficulty tiers which need to be unlocked by completing them in order. Each tier introduces new vehicles and each race acts as an introduction to that vehicle. It makes sense early on in the game to force you to play the different classes to give you an idea of your options, but to deny you this choice for the entirety of the campaign feels unnecessarily restrictive. With so many different classes of vehicles and different routes that you can take in each race, it seems like a strange decision not to let you tackle each event in the way you want. This is particularly true in 2025 for reasons that I'll explain in a moment. Customization also isn't in the festival mode. I guess because you never race the same vehicle twice this makes sense, but again, in 2025 this sucks. Okay, so why does it suck so much today? The issue is that a large amount of content, such as the customization options and new vehicles, are locked behind online progression. And as of 2018, there is no online multiplayer. Remember how I said that there was an asterisk next to the ability to customize performance? Well, this system was exclusive to the online multiplayer. These performance perks provided various advantages, such as reducing boost cooldowns, improving grip on specific surfaces, or making you more resilient to getting rammed. They're kind of like the perks from Blur if you're familiar with that game. Another feature of online was the ability to make bets on races and wager chips, which is the game's currency. The way this worked was before a race you could pick any player to bet on, and if you beat them, you'd win. The higher the rank of the player you bet against, the higher the odds, and the more players in a race, the more you could bet. Can you imagine adding that sort of a feature in a game today? Woo! Online is gone, but there is offline split screen for up to 4 players with AI opponents. There's a couple of issues with local play though. The biggest problem is that unless you played it back in the day and still have a save with all the content unlocked, a third of the game's vehicles and plenty of the customization options are inaccessible. This makes playing Apocalypse in 2025 feel a bit like playing a demo. Now you can download a save file from the web pretty easily, but you will need to have a modded console or run the game through an emulator to use it. Reason being that save files are linked to the account that created them, and a stock PS3 will simply say, "Not today, kind sir." I also noticed quite a lot of stuttering and frame drops when playing it in split screen. It's not unplayable and the frame rate is reasonably stable, even with 4 players. It's just nowhere near as solid as something like Blur, and it makes the multiplayer less appealing than in the earlier games. On a positive note, even without everything unlocked, there's still loads of ways to customize the multiplayer events. You've got event types, the ability to toggle destruction on and off, the amount of AI rivals, and you can have a pretty high number of laps. I should also probably mention that the online component was resurrected by fans, although you will need to track down the community or know people playing it, as the lobbies are unsurprisingly a little quiet. I've dropped some information in the description below to help you set this up if you're interested. I was surprised reading and watching old reviews that some outlets criticised the visuals. While I don't think the visual design is as appealing as the vibrant aesthetic of Pacific Rift, and it does suffer a bit from the 7th gen baby poo colour palette, overall it's hard to find much to complain about. Sure, if you stop to inspect individual elements, some stuff doesn't look great, but the likelihood of stopping like this in an actual race is basically zero. Otherwise, the sense of scale and dynamism is super impressive, even more so given how smoothly it runs and that it's 1080p. The spectacle in some courses is really over the top, with attack helicopters chasing you, buildings falling down, explosions, and tons of rivals swarming you. Compared to the earlier games, it feels like there's a lot more going on because the tracks are more dynamic. One of them has you driving through a tornado, while another has a train crashing in the middle of the track. It's pretty awesome stuff. Tracks are significantly more detailed too, with debris and objects that you can drive through, and I love how spectators are now interactive. They can attack you, and if you mow them down, sometimes they'll hold on, briefly flailing about before getting unceremoniously tossed aside. Staying true to the series, the music is on point and perfectly matches the action. This series has always had great music, from Nirvana to Aphex Twin to Queens of the Stone Age to Pendulum and loads of others. Like many other components, Apocalypse mixes things up with a different approach. It has a bespoke orchestral score that was created by Hollywood composers Ian Honeyman and Klaus Badelt. It was then remixed by various DJs and producers, including the legendary DJ Shadow. So it's got this epic sense of scale without giving up the modern grungy flavour that the series is known for. It's dynamic too, of course, activating when key events happen. Performance on an actual PS3 is pretty solid. The frame rate targets 30 frames per second, and while there are moments where it dips below this, most of the time I was too busy thinking, how is the PS3 doing this, to notice? At the time of making this video, you can still purchase it from the PSN store, and there's even a demo if you want to check it out. If you like physical media, discs are pretty cheap and easy enough to find on eBay. Alternatively, it's playable through RPCS3. So if you like the idea of better visuals, better performance, and the ability to modify certain settings, you might want to check it out. As mentioned before, you should be able to use game saves downloaded from the web using this method too. I haven't tested this myself, so please take this info with a grain of salt, as compatibility and features will vary depending on your setup. It's a real shame that the incredible racing is wrapped up in such a horribly presented and, as of 2025, incomplete package. I cannot overstate how horrendously bad the story mode is. It doesn't have the legs of the previous games either, which is especially true if you don't have a pre-2018 game save. The festival mode doesn't have a huge amount of replayability, it can be finished in a few hours, and the multiplayer is heavily muted. With that said, the track design is exquisite, the vehicles handle well, and it looks and sounds absurd for a game this old. In spite of its flaws, if you enjoy the other titles in the series, then I reckon this is worth checking out. The number of ways that Evolution Studios chose to innovate make it a unique entry, and it's entertaining, even if it's not the best game in the series.